Where is TCU at in their position and potentially the next line of realignment or the next round of realignment? We know it's going to happen again. We have a special guest with us who's going to break down TCU's value. Where do they stand in the ever-changing world of college sports? That's coming up here on Locked On Horned Frogs, your team every day.
You are Locked On Horned Frogs, your daily podcast on the TCU Horned Frogs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, Locked On Horned Frogs, your team every day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Steven Simcox. Next to me is Tommy Fisher at TRF51 on Twitter or X. Tommy has been on the show multiple times. We typically have him on a few times during football season to talk about the team. And Tommy, you reached out to me this week because you're pretty locked into college sports as a whole, the movement and what's happening as far as college athletics go. And you want to talk realignment. So you're here today to do that. And let's start with the Big Ten rumor. I did an episode on this last week. James Yoder from Chat Sports, who's a Michigan graduate, he's founder of Chat Sports. He came out with a report that was basically like, hey, Big Ten's going to expand again or potentially look to expand again before 2026. If they do, Notre Dame is the big prize. But past that, Florida State, TCU, there were a list of other schools. I know the Arizona schools were involved as well. But he said in order, it's Notre Dame, Florida State, TCU, which, I mean, that seems to bode well for the Frogs, if that's the case. What would a Big Ten invite mean for this program in your eyes as you kind of look at the big picture and see how everything's been moving in the past few years?
It'd be huge. I mean, there's no other way to think about it. I mean, you'd be, leaving some close rivalries with, Tech and Baylor and such. But the gap is going to widen. You got to think of it in two different ways, right? So one is recruiting. We would be the only Texas school in the Big Ten. That would separate us from Tech, Baylor. It would even separate us from Texas and A&M. Something that people don't think about, and that people haven't thought about, and something that I kind of think about from time to time is, by losing Texas and OU, what kind of impact is that going to have on our recruiting by not having any true blue bloods on the schedule? Yeah, we're going to have good teams like us, but we won't have a true blue blood. These kids, I think that they want to play against the best. They want to showcase their skills, on those national TV games against, a Texas, OU, a Notre Dame, Ohio State, a Michigan, something like that. And if we don't have those on the schedule, I'm interested in how that would impact our recruiting going forward. We've recruited well. We've recruited at the third, in the Big 12 most years, behind obviously Texas and OU. So one would think that we would move up to number one. Now with NIL and everything going on, Tech kind of jumped on things. I think that they've kind of passed us a little bit, but that's just this 1 year. But we'll see how that goes. So I don't know. I think recruiting is going to be a huge advantage. The other thing is the financial gap. Like right now, NIL is paid, by fans like us, right? In the future, I think it's going to be coming from the schools. I think that players are going to be almost employees of the school. Yeah. And if you just look at the TV number separation, or not TV numbers, but the TV revenue, the Big Ten and the SEC are going to have twice the budget as the Big 12 and the ACC. How are you going to make that up? I don't know how you're going to make that up. So the financial gap is humongous. Recruiting is a big deal. Those are probably the two biggest reasons. And plus, I mean, DFW, the Metroplex, there's more people moving here every day from California, places back east, New York, Ohio. If the Big Ten had a footprint in the state of Texas, that would be massive for them, because a lot of their graduates are moving to Texas, and they would want to see their team play in Texas.
A couple things about what you said, and then we'll get to some of your reasoning behind why this would make sense. I know you have some research that you pulled as far as numbers and those kinds of things. You make a really good point about the recruiting, and honestly, it's not something that I thought a lot about until I heard you talk about it, or you've referenced it to me before. Because right or wrong, I mean, Oklahoma certainly the past decade, like that's been the standard bearer in the league. So they're leaving now, and yes, I know like other schools have jumped up and won titles outside of OU, but like they've been the school, right? And then Texas, not so much until this past season, but they're obviously building something really good. And those games mattered. Like you look 2 years ago when TCU went on that run, the moment that a lot of people took recognition of what they were doing and said, okay, this is legitimate. And is this totally correct? Probably not. I mean, they had bigger wins against Kansas State and Oklahoma State, but when they went to Austin and when they beat Texas in that game as 7-point dogs in front of, 100,000 people or whatever it was at Darrell K. Royal Stadium that night, that was the moment for a lot of national folks to say, oh, okay, TCU has a chance to go 12-0. Like they're probably going to be in the mix here in the college football playoff. And so those games, they mean a lot. You're losing that. You still have great games on the schedule, but they don't have the cachet that, games against those two teams do. And when you talk about the financial gap, Jeremiah Donati said recently that he would prefer, and he said this Fort Worth Star Telegram and other media that were assembled there, he said he would prefer at this point that NIL becomes something that the schools do. So the money gets funneled to the school. We pay the student athletes, and there's a lot of different things that could happen within that structure that would be good for college sports as a whole. But you're right, like that entails TCU raising money and making money to then essentially pay, athletes to play, which is what they're doing now in a roundabout way. But why, you mentioned the Big Ten footprint in the state of Texas. TCU actually, and you pointed this out to me, based on some pretty concrete numbers, has high value in the Big 12. Like you could make the argument they are the most valuable team left over as the conference has kind of been picked apart to a certain extent.
Yeah, I follow some people on Twitter, and I also listen to other YouTube channels. There's a couple people that have kind of dug into the numbers. One of them is a guy named Jeff Fuller. He put up a almost like a rebuttal to what was put out there by one of the Arizona newspapers or publications, where they talked about the value of each of the Big 12 programs and the new programs coming in. They didn't mention TCU, Baylor, or BYU because they're private universities. So Jeff went in there and he figured out what the ratio that they were using, and he figured out what TCU's numbers were, and he figured out what Baylor's numbers were, and he figured out what BYU's number were. And I was actually kind of surprised. I was very glad at what I read, but TCU actually generates the most revenue of all the Big 12 teams that are in now, and that includes Colorado, that includes Utah, that includes everybody. Second most is Kansas. So as far as revenue, we know that TCU has money, and we're actually making money, which is great. And so they see the value of the program. We're in a good spot there as far as everybody else in the Big 12. If you want to look at, TV numbers, TCU does extremely well in TV numbers. I think in the last 10 years or so, I think we're second behind Oklahoma State. And we've actually drawn better than, half the Big Ten, a lot of the SEC schools. If you look at, if you want, one of the ways you can kind of think of measuring a brand, which I'm not sure there's an official equation of how you measure a brand. But if you want to look at, how many times the team plays on one of the national broadcasts, right? So so the TV executives obviously like TCU. We're ranked ahead of Washington. We're ranked right below Oregon. We're ranked above everybody else in the Big 12, in the new Big 12, except for Oklahoma State. As far as those teams on the cusp of, the whole conference realignment, we're actually ahead of Florida State in that regard. We're behind Clemson. We're well behind Notre Dame. Notre Dame is very strong in that regard. But we're above most, So there's a lot of things that TCU has going for it as far as, brand and TV numbers and all these other things. So the biggest thing is, what is the equation for realignment, right? Nobody has a pulse on that except for the people who are actually making these decisions. In the beginning, when all realignment stuff started, everybody thought Stanford would be a shoo-in to the Big Ten because their academics are so elite. Their research is top-notch, Stanford and Cal. So my rebuttal to that is I'm not sure that that's the biggest part of this equation, because if it was, Stanford and Cal wouldn't be taking half a share to play in the ACC. They'd be getting the full share in the Big Ten. Mm-hmm. Now, it matters. I know it matters. TCU academically is a very fine school, as is Baylor. We're both top 100 universities. I think we're 89 and Baylor's 88 or something like that. So academics, yes. Research is the only thing that concerns me. We're not an AAU school. Most of the schools, I think all the schools in the Big Ten, except for maybe Oregon, are AAU certified school or AAU schools, and we're far from that. So it all depends on who's making this decision. If it's the TV executives, I feel comfortable with TCU and where we are. If it's the presidents, and the presidents care about affiliating with somebody who has a lot of research money and generates a lot of research money and does a lot of research, then I don't feel as comfortable. So.
Well, and I think a lot of people, so for a long time, the discussion was TV market shares. So, okay, regionality, like you want a presence in the West Coast because you want the LA TV market, all that. And one thing that people have mentioned is TCU's DFW location, which I think that matters. I don't think it matters nearly as much as it did 10 years ago, because everything is streamed now to a certain extent, and basic cable isn't as popular. But I think going back to your point earlier, one, yeah, there's a number of people who've relocated from Big Ten country to Texas for various reasons. So the ability for them to come see games. But then also the Big Ten is made a big effort. The SEC is staying regional because they're like, we can get who we want in the Southeast. Like, we're not really super interested in expanding. The Big Ten is going coast to coast now. And so having a place in Texas where, honestly, and maybe unfortunately for TCU to a certain extent, there'd be a recruiting base there. There'd be an opportunity to network there. So it's not so much like we're going to get the Dallas, Nielsen ratings. It's just the idea of we have a location, we have a home base in the state, in a huge hub where things are happening. And so that could be really good.
I think, honestly, our location, I think if you were to poll the other coaches in the Big Ten, they absolutely would want TCU in the Big Ten, because when they recruit, how much easier is it to pull a guy from Duncanville or Fort Worth or Frisco or wherever to say, hey, every other year, all of your family is going to get to go watch you play at TCU, right? That's a big thing. Mm-hmm. Texas is probably the most talent-rich state in the country as far as producing Division I level athletes, especially in football. Football's king here. And for the Big Ten not to have a presence in the most college football rich state, I don't see how they wouldn't want that, So I think, and the thing that separates us from like a Baylor, well, there's a lot of things that separate us from like a Baylor and a Tech, is we are actually located in the Metroplex.
Yeah.
Right? Like I could probably go outside and throw a rock and probably hit one or two Division I level type of players, because there's plenty of them around, and the coaches want to recruit here. I think as far as just having a strategic presence, I think for the Big Ten, I think even the presidents, they probably want to have a presence in the Metroplex or in Texas, especially the Metroplex. So I think above all, I think that's probably our greatest asset. And not to mention the winning. I mean, I've read that we're a top 10 winning program in the college football era, and that's crazy because we've had 5 and 7 seasons,
three 5 and 7 seasons the last 5 years.
If be somewhat consistent, like in Oklahoma State, we'd probably be in the top 6 or 7, but we've had high highs and we've had low lows. So that's why I think this coming year in the ecosystem of college football is huge for us. We cannot afford another 5-7 season. We need to win. We need to be 8, 9, 10 wins. We need to be finishing towards the top of our conference.
So what could work against TCU? We'll tackle that issue next here in Locked On Horned Frogs, your team every day. Download the Gametime app today. If you need tickets, whether it's for a sporting event, comedy show, theater production, whatever it is, download the Gametime app. Use the promo code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. No hidden fees. I mean, there's some fees. I'm not going to lie to you. There's some fees involved. But the great thing about the Gametime app is when you hit whatever ticket you're looking at, they'll tell you exactly what you're going to pay. So you're not going to get a checkout and be like, wait, I'm paying $50 more. They'll tell you exactly what the price is when you click on the tickets. $20 off. Use the promo code LOCKEDON. They'll give you the view from your seat right there, a picture of, okay, this is what you're going to see when you sit down. Download the Gametime app today. Promo code LOCKEDON. Sports, music, movies, whatever it is. Gametime is the best place in the secondary ticket market. Proud sponsor of the Locked On Network. So, yeah, Tommy, you mentioned the academic situation earlier, the no AAU accreditation, which I think that's something that matters. I don't know how much they're going to continue to look at it moving forward, depending on how much they want to expand, the Big Ten, that is. But what else in your mind could work against the Frogs in, if somebody's shopping around, specifically the Big Ten, having them in mind, if they get overlooked in the next possible round of realignment?
So I think the perception that we're just some small religious school, in Texas, we obviously don't have a lot of living alumni, we have a lot of fans, but a lot of our fans ain't even in the Metroplex, right? I think 30% of the graduates graduate from the state, or they're coming from the state of California. And people will say, just because you're in the Metroplex doesn't mean you carry the Metroplex, which we don't. We carry a portion of it. We carry a big portion of it. But my rebuttal to that is, does Rutgers carry New York? I'm not sure it does. Yeah. Or does UCLA carry Los Angeles? I'm not sure it does. I think that the perception that we're just a small religious school is one thing. And I think the biggest thing is, the AAU status, the research. And there's not a lot we can do about that. But if we make a commitment to that, then maybe that'll be enough. I don't know. But then again, like I said, if that's what matters, why is Stanford and Cal not in?
Right.
So
I think the biggest thing, and well, maybe not the biggest thing, but one thing in my mind too, and you talked about it before we went to break, you got to get a foothold and you got to start winning more games. Yep. And we'll get a better picture this year of what TV coverage is going to look like in the new Big 12. But if you're playing Texas Tech and both teams are 4-3, there's a good chance that's going to be on FS1 or FS2 at 11 a.m. Yep. And the more that is consistently an issue, that could be a problem, because if you're not in the spotlight, if Savion Williams has a big year and we don't hear on College Game Day, at least somebody being like, hey, did you guys know that Savion Williams has 600 yards in the first 5 weeks of the season? Like, I'm just curious to see what the media coverage is going to look like for the league, because I think for a long time, as you said earlier, there's been some marquee games on the schedule that you can circle and say, okay, well, we know, like, when we play Oklahoma, when we play Oklahoma State, when we play Texas, there's going to be good coverage. You don't play Colorado this year, right? And so you're not getting, unless it's in the Big 12 championship game, you're not going to get the Coach Prime bump for 1 week where all eyes are kind of on you. Hopefully that game at Utah is a big one. Hopefully the game towards the end of the season against Arizona, you're talking about Big 12 championship implications. Because if not, then you risk, and I don't want to compare it to this. Don't get me wrong, I'm not comparing it to this school completely, but like Liberty went undefeated in the regular season last year, right? I don't think many people in casual college football world could name 5 players on that team. Caden Salter is probably the first name that comes to mind, and that's about where the list ends. And I think the Big 12 will get better media coverage than that, but you don't want to get into a place where, perception is reality. So like we can shake the walls and bang the drum for the great college football that's happening in the league as much as we want, but if it's not getting covered on a national level, then you just risk the idea of like, man, does anybody know what we're doing besides, other teams in the Big 12? So I hope that's not the case, Tommy, but I'm concerned about, even if you win like 8 games this year, I think that's awesome. I think it's a step forward. I think it's good for the program, but I don't know how much that's going to move the needle, in the big picture, if you get what I'm saying.
Yeah, I think we need to create our own storylines here, right? So, if you looked at when we had that 12-0 run, our Iowa State game drew tremendous numbers, and Iowa State was horrible that year. The Baylor game drew tremendous numbers, because half the people were there to watch us lose because they're Alabama fans or they're Tennessee fans, right? It doesn't matter. They were still there watching it, right? And it's the TV people, they don't care why they're watching it. They just care that they're watching it. Mm-hmm. We need to do the best thing that we can do. We need to take care of the things that we control. What we control is our scheduling, especially our out-of-conference scheduling, right? I wasn't exactly happy that we're playing Stanford this year. No offense to Stanford. But these are the times where we need to play that Ohio State to get our numbers up. We need to play those Michigans, a Clemson, a Florida State, whoever, right? Our whole conference needs to do that because we don't have a blue blood anymore, right? Yeah. If you look what that run that Cincinnati had when they were undefeated, the biggest reason that they even got in the playoff is because they had that win at Notre Dame. If they don't have that win at Notre Dame, maybe Oklahoma State gets in. Maybe Baylor gets in. Who knows? But it wouldn't have been them. So we as a conference and we as a program, we need to schedule these big time games, and we need to hold our own in these big time games because Texas helped us by almost beating Alabama, right? Texas lost to Alabama by 1 at home with their backup quarterback, right? So that helped us. That helped the perception of our win against Texas because we beat Texas by more points than Alabama did in the same place with their starting quarterback.
Yeah.
Texas going on the road and beating Alabama definitely helped the perception and the strength of the Big 12, right? So we got to play in those kind of games. Several years ago, I remember Oklahoma State played Florida State after they won the national championship. We gave them a game. West Virginia played somebody else out, I think Alabama, and they gave, we got to play those types of games and we got to perform well as a conference and especially for TCU because we don't have that, that blue blood anymore. So
we'll open up the crystal ball and make a few predictions here in a second here on Locked On Horned Frogs. eBay Motors, if you're having issues with your car, and you can't mess around with your car. It gets you everywhere. Most of you are probably in Texas. Public transportation is not really a thing. You need your vehicle. If you don't know exactly what you need, eBay's Guaranteed Fit program makes it easy for you. And they have everything. They have stuff that'll just keep your car running or will take it to the next level. But if you put the make and model of your vehicle in the website there, it'll allow you to add the part to the shopping cart and tell you automatically whether or not it's the right part for your car. Millions of parts for your MVP with time in parts that fit every ride. eBay Motors, millions of options there, and they make it easy and accessible for you. We're thankful for their sponsorship here at the Locked On Network. As I bring Tommy back into the picture here. So, okay, Tommy, if you're kind of looking at the crystal ball, 5 years from now, what do you think, what kind of situation is TCU in? And whether that's you think they're in the Big Ten, or are they still, in the major area of college football? What do you feel like happens as the wheels continue to churn here over the next few seasons?
So I think, and I've read this and you've read this too, our fate is kind of aligned with North Carolina. Like if North Carolina goes to the SEC, that'll help our chances of getting into Big Ten. I'm not sure the Big Ten would take us. I could see them taking us if somehow the Big Ten, I'm not sure the SEC would take us unless somehow the Big Ten got into Texas, but they got Texas A&M because they don't want to be with Texas anymore. Then I could see the SEC adding another team in the state of Texas. There's a lot in the air that I've read. I've seen some people think that there's no way. I've seen people say that, yeah, there's a strong possibility. I think in the end, I think the Big Ten and the SEC are probably going to add 4 more teams apiece. If they add 4 teams, I think our chances are probably about 70% to be one of the 4 teams. If they add 2, I don't think we make it. So with that said, you know what I hope, right? But hope isn't always reality. I think that we'll always have a seat at the table. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure if any of the Big 12 teams get pulled, to be honest.
Yeah.
And I think that we'll probably be in the Big 12. I hope we're in the Big 10, but I think we're probably going to be in the Big 12. And I think the ACC is going to kind of fall apart because I think Clemson's going to get out. I think Miami, I think Florida State, and I think the team in North Carolina. But past that, I think the Big 12 is going to add like a Louisville, a Pitt, a Virginia Tech, and maybe 1 or 2 more. And we'll have like a 24 team conference. And I think the Big Ten will have a 24 team conference, and the SEC will have a 24 team conference. And we'll have to play second fiddle behind the Big Ten and the SEC is what I think will happen. That's not what I hope happens. And there's a good chance that that's wrong, but I'm just trying to be a realist. I think, ideally we'd be in the Big Ten.
I think that TCU will still be playing at the highest level of college football. I don't know what it's going to look like. And I know everybody has said this, and like there's a number of Pac-12 schools that probably have the same opinion. But I just believe that there's the athletic program at TCU, there's too many individuals that are committed for it to stay where it's at the highest level for them to completely fall off. So if the Big Ten and SEC eventually decide, hey, we're going to uproot and leave, whether that's Brett Yormark being like, bring us with you, or TCU finding a way to have the resources and the money to make it sustainable, I believe they do that. I do feel like they're probably still in a world where there's a big gap between, what them and other Big 12 members are making as opposed to the 2 major conferences. And I guess my biggest concern is, the Big Ten and SEC right now are talking about just ridiculous ideas, like 2 automatic buys in the playoff, as many as 4 automatic qualifiers. And nobody's really checking them to this point. I mean, maybe someone does eventually, but I just worry about, like, okay, I want to keep pouring resources into this. I want to keep going for it. Like, I think if you're going to be in it, you go for broke. But what's the realistic chances of, in a 14 or 16 team system, winning 4 or 5 games in a row when you're probably talking about a talent gap and a resource gap? Now, they've punched up in weight classes before. I mean, we've seen this university do amazing things, but in the past, Tommy, it's been, we beat Wisconsin on neutral field in a 1-game situation, like with a really good team. I think that's possible. And beat Michigan on neutral field, 1-game situation where they weren't ready to get hit in the mouth, and they did. I think it's possible for them to do that. But it looks like we're moving more towards you're going to have to win a game on the road and then go win, a bowl game and then possibly win another game to win a national championship. And that just seems like a really brutal path. But ultimately, I feel like they're going to be involved. I just don't know how many hands are going to be tied behind your back when all the dust settles and you're really looking at the future of the sport.
I think Chip Kelly's had the best idea that I've heard is why do we have to affiliate this with a conference, right? Why does it have to be? Why can't it just be about the football teams, right?
Yeah.
Teams like Utah, Kansas State, TCU, we've earned a right to be part of this echelon, this upper echelon of football.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if I'm a TV person, the Big Ten, SEC, but why don't we just pay the best programs and they basically eat what they kill?
Yeah.
Why does Ohio State have to carry every Big Ten West team in Michigan?
Sure. Yeah. Why does Purdue have to, be drug up there?
Right.
Or Vandy in the SEC?
Half the Big Ten is just not good. They're just not good. The Big Ten had 3 teams. Now they're going to have 5 teams, maybe 6. And that's more than us, but they have, it doesn't justify the financial.
The massive gap. Yeah.
Yeah. And the SEC, to me, they've kind of earned it, but even then they have 2 or 3 teams, right?
Well, no, yeah, it's the thing. It's like the SEC pound for pound is better, but yes, Georgia, Alabama, LSU, like once a development cycle, maybe twice a development cycle, they're all miles better than a lot of these schools. But, there's also a lot of riffraff there that is middle of the pack, just like everybody else is. So,
even like, is Alabama going to be Alabama anymore?
Well, and that's a good point. What do they look like with Kalen DeBoer?
Is Michigan going to be Michigan anymore? I doubt. They lost a ton of players. And,
right.
They're going to get slapped by the NCAA, or they're going to attempt to be slapped by the NCAA. There's just so much, I think I hate it because I think teams like Utah, Kansas State, TCU, maybe a couple other ones, they've earned the right to get the money that these other schools are getting.
Yeah.
And I think it's just wrong. And I think the TV people, if they care about TV revenue and TV viewership, TCU's in there,
Right.
Oklahoma State's in there, and I don't know. The whole conference thing and the way that, the SEC people think the SEC is so great, yet they had a losing record at a conference, you're great. Your top 3 teams are great. Same thing with the Big Ten. You're no better than the rest of us, and we beat their best. So
yeah.
It is what it is. We'll see.
He's Tommy Fisher. I'm Steven Simcox. Follow Tommy at TRF51 on Twitter and X. We'll be back tomorrow. Thank you, Tommy, for doing this with us. Make sure you check him out and tweet all your complaints to Tommy. No, I'm just kidding. You can tweet them to me as well.
Yeah.
It's Locked On Horned Frogs, your team every day.